free and cool and engaging recording for your podcast, consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of equity, energy, and empowerment with your co-hosts, Victoria Cornelio and myself, Jensen Cummings. In today's episode, we discuss how much growth is too much, balancing innovation, equity, and planetary limits. We're going to have with our guest, Professor Tom Murphy. Now, Tom Murphy is a professor of physics at the University of California, San Diego, an amateur astronomer in high school, physics major at Georgia Tech, and PhD student in physics at Caltech. Murphy has spent decades reveling in the study of astrophysics. Professor Murphy, thanks for being with us.
Welcome, everybody.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
All right. Your work has introduced me to an entirely new concept, that of planetary limits. So I wanted to start there. Can you start by kind of helping us define that term and understand its ramifications?
Sure. Well, it's not that surprising that Earth is a finite size, and there are only so many continents and so many oceans and so many animals and so many plants and so many people. And we have a system that has been built around the concept of growth. And that's been the case for centuries, even millennia, so that we have a collision in the making between this fabric of our culture and the reality of a finite planet. It doesn't take much to look around and see the impacts of us bumping into these boundaries. And there are people who talk about it in the framing of boundaries. But, you know, it's a single little speck in space, and there's only so much we can squeeze out of it.
Understood. All right. I'll let Victoria kind of jump in here and ask a few more of the technical questions, but I appreciate that. I think it's important for us to kind of understand where we're starting this conversation from.
Yeah, thank you. And from what we've learned from you, you're a co-founder for Plan. That's correct, yeah?
That's right, yeah. That's the Planetary Limits Academic Network.
Yeah, there we go. And something that I find really valuable about the work that you guys do is bridging disciplines to address the challenges we're facing today. Can you talk a bit about what those challenges are and what's the benefit of having that intersectionality of disciplines come together to address them?
Well, yeah, I think it's been a fascinating experience to connect to people from different fields. You know, my background is physics and astrophysics, and this is not stuff that we tend to talk about. And so I've learned a great deal in interacting with others, and I believe it's been a learning experience all around. But there are also disconnects because styles and languages are different. And as a physicist, I'm used to being disappointed by the world. And by that, I mean, it doesn't matter what we dream up in our heads. It doesn't matter one bit. You do an experiment and the result is what it is, and you just have to swallow it. And, you know, we don't have relativity and quantum mechanics and these kinds of concepts because we adore them and because we appeal to the authority of somebody like Einstein. We hated those ideas when they came around and rejected them and just went kicking and screaming until the experiment said, no, you don't get the choice. And so I think that's one of the disconnects that I've encountered is the less constraint in other fields. And so planetary limits is a very natural idea to me. It's like nature is what it is, and the universe is what it is. You don't get to design it in your head. So I think it's been productive and valuable for me, certainly. But all of us, I would say, recognize that there are some fundamental problems in the way that we go about living on this planet. And it's a very diverse set of viewpoints that, it's all different people feeling different parts of the elephant. But it is really rewarding when you've got convergence and have a sense of coming to the same realizations from completely different directions and completely different sort of traditions. So that almost, it's a reassuring thing that maybe we're on the right track. Maybe this is, if we all got to the similar place from different paths, then there's something to this.
For sure. And I think that's very interesting because, for example, I'm not a scientist. I come more from a sociological standpoint. So planetary limits seem obvious to me, but because I know we don't have water for everybody. So we see it from that space of how it's affecting people and where we're sort of, lacking in those basic needs. And in your work, you describe modernity as a period of increasing energy use, resource consumption, and economic growth. Is that correct?
That has been the trend for sure.
So how do you think that has shaped humanity's perception of sustainability and planetary limits when we talk about modernity?
I think it's totally distorted our views of what is real and possible, because we have constructed what we think is a reality, but it's a very temporary reality. It's a stunt. And, it's if you throw a rock up into the air, you'll see it ascending for a while. And if you only witness that part of it, you might, and don't know anything about physics, you might naively think, well, it just goes up forever. That's what this thing is doing, and it's what it's done. But there are dynamics and there are factors at play that are shaping the trajectory of that stone. And we all know that it will not go up forever and it won't hang indefinitely in the air. And I think it's very similar when you've got a system that is completely reliant on non-renewable resources. And think about what that term means, non-renewable resources. They don't come back. You use them and they're gone. So even things like renewable energy are completely dependent on non-renewable resources. There's no such thing as some indefinite game that we can play. We can't suspend the rock in midair. It certainly can't keep going up. And it's not just resources. That's where I kind of came at this originally, is from the point of view of material resources and energy. But that's because I had narrow boundaries, as we all do. And, lately I'm recognizing more of the ecological side of things, which we tend to just completely ignore because we're pretty ignorant of the fact that we're dependent on an ecological context, that we are not separate as humans that sort of popped onto this world without a context and without having a complete biological dependence on everything around us. So we couldn't be who we are without the evolutionary history and heritage, without plants, without insects, without bugs, without fish, without microbes, without fungi, without the sun, without water, without rock and minerals. I mean, we really are an integrated piece of this planet. And how could it be any other way? Yet we have concocted this notion in our heads that we've transcended that and we're different and we maybe live forever and, all kinds of fantasies that really are biophysically ignorant. And when I recognize that, saw the statistic that 96% of mammals on the planet are now humans and our livestock, we've really squeezed out the wild mammals and it's going down fast. So that at this point, for every human on the planet, we only have 2.5 kilograms. That's a little over 5 pounds of wild land mammal mass. It's smaller than a cat. Each of us has only less than a cat of wildlife, of wild mammals out there. So in 1800, it was 80 kilograms, which is my own mass, so I can relate to that. And, 10,000 years ago, it was 50,000 kilograms. It's almost gone. And it's going down fast. And we're doing a great job of that. And, anybody who thinks that we can keep on this trajectory and things will be fine are just simply not tuned in to how this world works and how we got here and how dependent we are as a part of an ecology. And we're initiating the sixth mass extinction, which doesn't tend to go well for large, hungry, high maintenance mammals like ourselves. So be careful there.
What's the pushback, Tom, that you get when you talk about the cat size of wildlife? What is the other side of that argument trying to say?
I mean, I have not heard a credible case that it doesn't matter, except for delusions that we can technology our way out of any, innovate our way out of any. That's an empty platitude. It strikes people by surprise. It's not like they've thought through this and they have a good sense for how humans can live on this earth ecologically detached. I mean, think about the space station. That's an ecologically detached thing, right? It's not part of this earth. Well, not really, because we ship oxygen up to the thing on a monthly basis at high cost and water. There's aggressive recycling, the best that technology can do, but it's not good enough. So it's tethered completely to Earth's biosphere. And we've never made an artificial environment. We can't. It's far beyond our capability. There's a complexity here that we just simply don't appreciate, don't realize, and we've imagined ourselves to be gods who can do anything, but we can do almost nothing compared to the amazingness of life and ecology. Almost nothing. An amoeba is many orders of magnitude more amazing and complicated than anything we've ever engineered. Anything we've ever engineered. So it's just leaps and bounds beyond our limited brains.
Wow. I get it. I understand why people can't say more than that. Yeah. I feel like
feel small. So my reaction is the same as the scholar's reaction on the other side of the equation. As can't even fathom that small of an amount of space taken up by wildlife.
Right. Huh? That's the right reaction. I've plotted it, and it's nosediving. It's going down so fast. It's in this just looks like a terminal nosedive, and it's not clear how that's going to rebound unless what we're doing stops.
And I think something I found really interesting from your article, Modernity is Incompatible with Planetary Limits, you talk about some of the greatest challenge may be conceptual or cultural rather than purely technological. Can you sort of elaborate on that?
Yeah, so we try to, I would say, enact a worldview. We have some concept of what it's all about, and we sort of play that out. And if our worldview is flawed, we will end up with flawed results. If our worldview is that the planet belongs to us and we're here to rule it and master it, we will enact something that can't work. I mean, our brains are simply incapable of recognizing the full complexity of a billion-plus-year evolved ecosystem, interdependent, interconnected web of life. We can only identify scratch the surface of a few of the strands of that web of life. We have no concept of how it all works. And so culturally, we have seen cultures on this planet who embrace that view that life is much bigger than us. It's a view of humility. It's a view of lucky to be here, a part of a community of life, reciprocal relationship, not the masters. And so culturally, one can have stories and cultural beliefs that don't lead to destructive behaviors. I mean, if you're a person who believes that the river is basically alive and the source of so much life and diversity and in ways that you can't understand, and it's dynamic and it changes and it floods and it goes through this entirely inscrutable kind of series of behaviors. And if you revere that as something that you can't possibly comprehend, that culture would never dream of damming the river to produce electrons to power some hairdryer. It's impossible to go there from that different cultural point of view. So yeah, our cultural viewpoints completely, set out what we allow and what we don't, and what we try and what we don't, and what we revere and what we don't. So that's incredibly important.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful way to put it, because I don't know how much you think our shift from being in more rural areas into moving into urban and cities and having this city life, how much that's a component of how separated we feel from nature. Because there is that thing where we say, oh, I'm going to go spend the weekend in nature, without realizing walking down the street is just walking in nature as well.
Yeah, that's absolutely a part of that disconnection. If your daily life depended on understanding the rhythms and the cycles of the world, the living world around you, you'd know a lot more about it, and you would understand your role in it as just a piece of it, not as its masters. And so I think, we live in an increasingly virtual world of our creation, but as I say, it's a stunt. It's not ecologically rooted. It doesn't have a future. It's kind of like, I've compared it to a cancer, which is a way to take a healthy living tissue and sort of, the tissue isn't bad. The pancreas isn't bad, even if it has developed cancer, but it is susceptible to this mode that turns on growth, and it completely ignores the systems element, the interconnection of how it's part of an organism, how it's part of a functioning, being, and it has a role, and it depends on the roles of all these others. It just races off on this dead end, dead, literally, and because it can, and because it sort of, who's going to tell it not to? But it's not part of a functioning organism, nor is modernity part of a functioning ecology. It's a cancerous one-time stunt that's growing to the point of squeezing out, just like a tumor squeezes out, displaces other healthy tissues and metastasizes, modernity is doing that to the living world. And it's suffering. The living world is really suffering, and we can't survive without a living world. We're just simply too embedded in it, and we don't recognize that.
Yeah, and I think explaining it in that way very tragically represents what the magnitude of what we're talking about right now. If we see it as our planet is the body that we need to survive and it's dying, what are we going to do? And in your work, you talk about the concept of overshoot. And if I understand correctly, it's very central to your arguments. I would just like to hear more about how you define overshoot and what that looks like.
Yeah, so overshoot comes from sort of population biology, where you have a carrying capacity of your environment, how many rabbits can be supported, how many coyotes, how many, there's some, and I'll use equilibrium very loosely because nature never really settles into an equilibrium. It's always on the move and it's dynamic, but there's a sort of a range that is supported and balanced in a sense, in a dynamic balance. But if your population is double what the environment can support, it can maybe last for a while, but then predation and disease and starvation and all those things will come and catch up. And so that's part of thinking that we're separate. Oh, we're not animals is the part of our culture. I think that's easily refuted, but the mentality is that we're not animals and we can overcome anything like this, but that's a delusion. That's not true. We are almost certainly in overshoot, in that we have, far exceeded the regenerative capacity of the planet to support us. And one very easy way to see that is we're using non-renewable resources. That's burning through, sometimes literally burning, but, chewing through finite resources, and that's a limited game. Now, let's see, where was I going to go with that? If you take, I talked about mammals and how there's only 2.5 kilograms of wild land mammal mass per person on the planet. There are about 5,000 mammal species. And I'm not saying this is the correct way, this is not necessarily equilibrium, but just to give you some ballpark, if humans had an equal share of mammal mass among the species, there would be about 4 million humans on the planet. And that's kind of where we were for millions of years. Okay, so there's some data there, and 8 billion is 2,000 times bigger than that. And so I don't think we're dealing with, we're 30% over, or, I think we're orders of magnitude over what long term is really reasonable.
Right. And I've seen these graphs that show as we've gotten more aggressive with our carbon use, population begins to grow. And some of the literature and debates around that sort of fall into Malthusian territory. So I don't know what your views are around those things.
Yeah, it's very fascinating to me how eager people are to dismiss once and for all anything that has, some uncomfortable flavor to it and has any chink in the armor. So Malthus saw finite land, growing people, said, and predicted population peak and famine and all kinds of things, which wasn't wrong in the context of his world. What he didn't anticipate was fossil fuels, and that completely was a game changer. But guess what? That is temporary, isn't it? And so, yeah, you can kick the can down the road, but he's not going to be wrong in spirit. The Limits to Growth work in 1972 very similarly had a powerful set of simulations that they tried their darndest to come up with ways to not have our population and our kind of modernity collapse mid 21st century. And so that's one important thing to realize, is that this was 1972 and their simulations were showing problems out beyond today's date. And so it hasn't been proven wrong yet, in the sense that we can't say that, no, we didn't follow anything like those trajectories. They worked really hard because their attitude was that our assumptions must be wrong. This can't be the way it's going to go. So let's see what we can tweak and tune. And it was a pretty robust result. And the reason is that anytime one has a delay in negative feedback, any corrective feedback, and negative feedback sounds bad, but it's what keeps you at equilibrium. Negative feedback can actually be in what we would call a positive direction. It can be for growth. If you're lower than the target, negative feedback is what pulls you back to it. So any delay in negative feedback leads to overshoot. And that's basically what we've got a system that works on fast timescales. Our economy and our politics all works on fast timescales, but human lives are many decades long. And so you just automatically have these sort of delay phenomena built in. And so Overshoot became just a very ubiquitous kind of outcome, but people are eager to dismiss things like limits to growth and Malthus. And, I just say wait for it, because it might not go exactly. Nothing ever goes exactly as one sort of imagines in their brains, because their brains are very limited and can only do so much. Everything's a surprise, but it's not going to be a surprise when a completely grossly unsustainable system fails to continue. That itself is guaranteed. And so, I'm with Malthus on that.
And when it comes to, because I think humans have this beautiful ability to adapt to an extent. And it sounds very much like with fossil fuels, for example, in this scenario, what we're doing is putting a Band-Aid on the inevitable hard conversation we're going to have on these topics, right? And there's examples like the island of Tikopia, and they're very ruthless sort of ideas.
By our flawed standards, who are we to talk? Yeah, our systems are ruinous, and they had something that worked. And different things work in different places. It's not a one-size-fits-all scenario. And you found that in indigenous cultures, there's lots of different diversity of worldviews and belief systems, but they were tuned over a long time,
of course,
to work in that location, in that context. And so, the proof is in the pudding. And right, ours is not proving itself.
Yeah. So with all this sort of dread from what it sounds like, what gives you hope or optimism about our ability to adapt and thrive within planetary boundaries, if any?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I feel no dread at all. And it's fascinating to me that this is the reaction of most people to this message. And what it tells me is that people are attached to modernity. People are attached to an idea. People are not attached to something that is survivable. And so, being in love with an abusing, partner is not good for you.
Toxic relationship.
Being in love with modernity is not good for us. It's abusive at a scale that we've never seen before. It's abusive. And so when people are depressed, when I say, your cancer is going to go away, be depressed about that. That's good news. We don't cheer for the cancer. So being attached to modernity, and I get it. I mean, I'm a product of modernity too. I grew up in it. There are parts of it that will never be pulled out of me. And so it's not that I completely lack the understanding of what people are going through, but the reaction of being, of dread or of depression is a reflection of where we put our loyalties and our love. And if you love the living world, if you love the squirrels and the newts, where I am, we have newts and they're just adorable things. I mean, my wife and I just, adore them. So, if that's what you love, then modernity's going away is not the worst thing that can happen. If you love humans, well, if you want humans to go down in a terrible, extinction level event, then keep modernity going. That's how we get there fastest. But if you love humans and you want humans to survive for 10,000, 100,000, million years, guess what? It has to be sustainable by definition. So you have to realize that any unsustainable system is not deserving of your love, but living things and humans are. And how do you do that? You have to get rid of the cancer.
And give us an idea for just an average person. What are some of the steps that they might take? What are some of the things that they can do on even just a local level to be able to make an impact when what we're talking about at a planetary level does seem dire, and it does seem completely daunting to even look at the problem, let alone have solutions for it. But at a small scale level, on the personal level, what do you recommend for people?
Well, this might sound like a cop-out, but it's not. And it's sort of repeating what I said, fall out of love with modernity. Don't look to that as what we should be attempting. And then lots of things will change. Your behaviors will just automatically change because you're not going to pursue the same kind of career. You're not going to pursue the same kind of material goods. You're going to, I retired early, and that means I'm going to be poor. I could have made a lot more money by staying in the game. I didn't believe in the game. I didn't want to be a player in it. I didn't need all that much. Now, I'm not living in a tent, obviously, and I'm very privileged, and I get that. And, there's some guilt around that. But, I've changed my lifestyle completely because I'm just not a believer. And I think if you have a lot of people who are not believers, they're not going to keep acting in a way that propagates that system, or at least it's going to start dialing down. And so that's the biggest thing we can do, is stop believing in it and change, where you get your meaning and satisfaction. And for me, that's the living world, and us as just a part of it.
And it ties very nicely to what you said about that cultural shift that we need.
Right. It's not plastic versus paper. It's not whatever. It's not those kinds of choices. It's at a much deeper level. It's not which car should I buy. It's like, why am I doing a car? It's at that level. And that's a huge level, because an EV versus an internal combustion engine, it's debatable whether the EV is even ecologically better. And the way I think of it is, the Titanic would have been equally capable. It was a coal-fired machine. It would have been equally capable of ramming full speed into an iceberg if it were driven by solar-powered batteries. And modernity is equally capable of continuing this six-mass extinction under any source of energy. It's what you do with the energy. It's clearing forests. It's mining materials. It's treating the living world as our, bank account. And so it's what you do with it that matters. And so an EV is just powering our way into, the same destructive behaviors. So the question becomes, why is my lifestyle demanding a car, and what can I change about my lifestyle so it doesn't? And yeah, they can be big changes, and it can be somewhat paralyzing, but what do you really care about? Do you care about breaking records to get across the Atlantic and maybe risk, hitting the iceberg? No matter what your power source is, it's the attitude, it's the intent. It's what do you intend to do and why? And so that's at the cultural level.
Tom, this is why we do this podcast. It's for us to learn and to be pushed in our beliefs. And I'm going to be rethinking my entire existence now. Thank you very much for that.
And how much physics was in there even? I mean,
right. No, it's very practical. I really appreciate the way that you described everything to us, because all of the metaphors and analogies you needed to use are ripe with clarity. We just don't want to pay attention to them. And I think that's what was clear in our talk today, was understanding. Again, I had no idea what planetary limits was. The second I heard it, I was like, well, obviously, duh, right? Like that makes all the sense in the world. And just like you said, when people go, huh, to you, it's because it's so clear and obvious that it shakes us to our foundation, which nobody wants that,
Right. And there's no worked out, well thought counter argument, because it's just not part of where people have been thinking. And so it's not that we have answers to these things, it's that we haven't been thinking about them.
Yeah, we haven't even conceived the questions, which is good. And, it's our job to ask the questions. So now you have us rethinking all the questions we're asking, and we appreciate that. So thank you for that. And I want to just let the audience know, really powerful, impactful conversation. There's going to be a little bit more. So if you enjoyed this conversation, please check out tangeliclife.org for the blog post. We're also going to have some additional time. We're going to spend a little bit more time here once we wrap this with Professor Tom Murphy. And he's taught us a lot about modernity, about planetary limits, about overshoot, about rethinking the way that we are approaching our existence on this planet. And that's what we're here to do with Tangelic Talks. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in, and hopefully we continue to challenge our own beliefs and continue to learn and evolve as individuals, as peoples, as a community, as a planet. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Cheers.
Thank you.
Let's talk power, let's talk change. From rural lights to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong. We're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride. Empowering the world, side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.